Hello lads, and welcome to yet another video, and welcome back to this little thing that I'm doing for God knows what reason. I'm putting myself through torture here, not because it's bad, but because it just takes up too much time. Welcome back to the second part of the Chibberthon, a little thing that I'm doing where, in preparation for Chris Chibnall taking up as the showrunner for Doctor Who, I'm looking through all his work that he's done for the show so far and seeing what he used in those, which you can transfer into the new series. It's all very good. Now, I've done all his Doctor Who stories in the last videos, and obviously now I'm going to move on to what he has been known to do more for in the Doctor Who universe, which is Torchwood. Now, this was actually, I'm ashamed to admit, my first experience watching Torchwood, so I didn't watch it all through chronologically. I literally just watched Chris Chibnall's stuff, but it was all good, and I enjoyed it anyway. That's a spoiler. Anyway, let's go on to talk about the episodes individually, as we start with his first actual televised contribution to the Doctor Who universe in Day 1. Yeah! Now, being the second episode in the first series of Torchwood, all the character introductions and that the pilot would have covered is out the way, and now we are focused purely on the story aspect of the series. And we wanted to get across this sort of thing that Torchwood was a more adult show to Doctor Who. It was worlds apart of the tone from the main series, and I think that Day 1 perfectly portrayed that by being infamous as the one with the the sex gas. Now, I felt that it wasn't just sex gas for the sake of sex gas, but it also tackled more mature themes and tackled issues that would have been relevant to the then society, such as beauty standards and sexualisation in the media. My favourite scene from this episode, in fact, is the bit where Karis is walking around and seeing all these sexualised adverts all around her and being sort of distorted by it, and the way that it's shot and edited with the music is great for portraying the confusion and sort of the bombardment of sexualisation, sexy times in that media then. The alien in itself, it can't be denied, is inventive and original, and it uses what humans consider natural, or most of us anyway, consider a natural process, and the energy and chemicals that are released from a natural state such as orgasm. Jesus Christ. I'm a family-friendly channel mostly. Now, despite this heading in a more story-focused direction for the series, now the pilot's out the way, it is still very focused on character and character motivations, and it is driven by the characters, especially Gwen, as she is the protagonist of the series mainly, and it focuses on her relationships, her development, and especially her introduction to Torchwood and how that's affecting her day-to-day life. Perhaps this is something we could see with the companions more, to see how their travels with the Doctor and the sights that they're seeing is affecting their personality. This was explored in the Russell T Davies era, and it is really something that I want to see introduced back into the series with Chibnall. It's also a key feature of Gwen's character at this stage that she's clearly empathetic and cares about the people in these situations and not just defeating the evil, and this is certainly a trait that I'd like one of the companions to have, because the Doctor may be desensitised to the death and stuff that he has been seeing for over 2,000 years now, and this has been seen with the 12th Doctor, and hopefully this does continue to the 13th Doctor, so we have this sort of not completely cold like the 12th Doctor was in Series 8 and some of Series 9, but just to have a more empathetic and human companion to sort of counteract that sort of what might have been a bit more cold and stale side for the Doctor's personality in regards to death. That'd be a nice sort of element to introduce. And also, as a final note for Day 1, the humour is fantastic. I mean, it might just be my dirty mind, and it's certainly not applicable for Doctor Who, but if Chibnall can write humour like this, then I feel like he is a good comedic writer in some aspects and can easily transfer that to a more child-friendly audience in Doctor Who, because after all, it is a family show, and you can't have talk about sex. Yeah, but moving swiftly on from the talk of sexy orgasm times, let's move on to Chibnall's next episode in Torchwood, which was, of course, Cyberwoman. Lisa! It's me! Now, Cyberwoman, I feel like this is an episode that gets a lot of slack, and understandably so, because of the design of the Cyberwoman. It is very sexualised, and whether that's a sort of feminist male gaze approach that you get to disliking it, or a sort of destruction of this Cyberman's powers and threat or whatever bullshit, and you just don't like it because of that. But let us not forget that I'm looking at Chibnall as a writer here. The Cyberwoman design was done by Ray Holman, who is a completely different department in the production than Chris Chibnall is as a writer. I can imagine Chibnall wrote it as a amalgamation of half human, half Cyberwoman, this sort of threat, a sort of the way that the Doctor, I forget his name, I'll remember in a minute, but was portrayed with sort of metal parts jolting out of him. I can imagine it's sort of maybe the producers that are saying we need it more sexy, we need to appeal to an adult audience, let's show a bit of belly, let's get the hips in, let's get the tit plates on. Now I'm going to put this out here, Cyberwoman is the best Cyberman episode since 2005. I am putting it above Age of Steel and Rise of the Cybermen. I adore this episode and I love it for everything it does. It doesn't just show the Cybermen's desire to convert everyone else into them, while that is a terrifying aspect, but also heavily focuses on the effects of loved ones and people that you know after you've been converted, especially more so in a sense, because now you have that sort of sense of who the person was still within this robotic body, so that's even more painful, but it still has that effect, and that's what I love about Chris Chibnall's early stuff in Torchwood, at least, because it shows the effect that it has on people. It shows the extent of how far people will go to save someone they love, especially after a horrific amalgamation and mutilation like this, but it gives another whole depth to a character who we thought was innocent, such as Ianto, and gives him a complicated motivation. It gives him a sort of, he's not perfect anymore, he has this giant flaw that he's betraying everyone, and he's doing it because he's doing it out of love and out of someone that he loves, obviously, and he's trying to save a life, because that, at the end of the day, that's all it is, but it's putting everyone else at threat, and I love that element, I adore that. We need more of that in Cybermen's story. We need the effect of human emotions, because after all, that's what they want to destroy, and using those, not just in a you got killed by love sense, but showing the bad side of what humans can do, and how far they'll go to protect someone. That's what we need in there. This also causes tensions in the Torchwood team. It creates an element of mistrust and betrayal, and everyone's sort of out for themselves. They don't know who to look out for. Now Ianto has sort of turned his back on the team and gone against them in a sort of selfish act. Everyone else doesn't trust him. And while this is very sort of mature and maybe not quite right tone for Doctor Who, because you want everyone to sort of get along mainly, but if there was one episode where everyone couldn't trust each other, maybe it's just simple human betrayal and selfishness that gets everyone else not to trust them, not to the extent that they get kicked out of the TARDIS, or maybe to that extent, who knows, that would be a good departure. But if we could have that element, that relationship between the characters, and not everyone's all friends all the time, but just one episode there's one where everyone doesn't like each other for a certain reason, that'd be great, and that theme could be explored brilliantly in that setting. I mentioned before that the visual effects of the Doctor, I think his name is Tanizaki now, I've done my research, the visual effects of him being partially converted with bits of metal sticking out of him is incredible, and it uses its gore that Torchwood needs to its full effect. And it isn't just gore for the sake of gore, and it doesn't just use what it's trying to achieve just because it can, like some other spin-offs. What have I been waiting for? Been wasting all my time. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the criminally underrated Cyberwoman, which I personally love. Let's get on to the next story that Chibnall penned, which was Countrycide, with the weirdest spelling of countryside I've ever seen. Honestly, it's spelled with an S, not a C. Side, Countrycide. Now, Countrycide, with a weird spelling, I will put out there, is my favourite episode of Chibnall's in Torchwood. Maybe my favourite episode, well, probably, yeah, that he's ever wrote for the Doctor Who universe, because I absolutely adore it. Let me get into why. It achieves what episodes like Sleep No More failed to do. It tackles the not being able to see the monster and it only hiding in the shadows. You're only catching glimpses of it, a shadow, a silhouette. It does that perfectly. It creates tension and fear and mystery to the monster. It doesn't hang on it too long. You never see the details of it from when they're chasing it around. And it just makes you think what could be under that hood. And it's that fear of not knowing, it's that sort of mystery, it's what your imagination plays that does it perfectly. Obviously, this was an episode that aired before midnight in Series 4, so this is really the first example, perhaps in New Who at least, that it does this. And it's brilliant. It's fear inducing, and it generally makes you worried and sort of scared for what the threat could be. Especially when you hear what the monster can do and you don't see it for yourself. You get all this information, it strips victims of its flesh, and you see the bodies mauled, and you see the fear in sort of survivors' eyes when they think it's coming again. It's that thing where you don't actually see it that is terrifying. This hasn't been achieved in Sleep No More, because you can see the monster and you can see that it's a bit cheap, and the sort of tackiness of it takes away from that. Listen, it tries to achieve this by having the thing under the bed and tries to get you to use your imagination to what it is, but there's no threat there. You don't see what it does, you don't hear what it does, you don't see the fear in people's faces when, like, after they've survived it or whatever. This is the purest form, apart from Midnight, of not seeing what something is but seeing the threat of it, and that is something that we need more of. Not totally, because if you do it too much it will ruin the effect of it and it'll get too predictable, but having this just once in a blue moon in the new series would be absolutely beautiful. And of course, this twist, some could say it's anticlimactic, but I think it's even better, because you're having all these images of these alien monsters that could cause this sort of threat and terror and fear into the villagers, but then you find out that, spoiler alert, it's actually humans who are doing it, and that, if anything, is more scarier than it being an alien itself. Now, I doubt that is a twist that could be incorporated into a new series thing, because it could get predictable after this and after some other things, but having the human as the villain all along is brilliant. If you could transcribe this as the humans being villains and putting in a historical setting, a pure historical episode would work incredibly. Because, if anything, isn't it more terrifying that after all these aliens and after all these killer robots and mercenaries and Daleks and Cybermen and everything, the thing that puts the most fear in people is the human race itself? And it might be a bit of a ball-wanky explanation and a sort of pretentious thought, if you want, but I think it's just a fun idea. And I know that it has been done more than once before, but it's just good. There's a reason why it works, and maybe it's not so much terror, but it's just anyone could do this. You could walk down the street and there could be a cannibal or a monster or a killer in your midst, and that's just terrifying. Because, I mean, if you see a blowfish or something, then you know it's an alien and you know it's up to no good, but the fact that it could be anyone, that is fucking scary. Anyway, I do love Countrycide, and I hope that more stuff like this gets introduced into Doctor Who in the future. But nevertheless, let's move on to the series finale of Series 1, End of Days.
The right kind of doctor.
Now, End of Days, I'm going to be honest, I feel like it's the weakest of Chibnall's episodes in Torchwood, and I'm going to explain why, but let's just note that Russell T Davies is the executive producer and the creator of Torchwood, but I honestly feel like Chris Chibnall took up more of the showrunner role, or the head writer at least, and if he can write episodes like this effectively, then he should have no problem with writing Doctor Who. Maybe there's a bit more pressure because it's more of a well-established thing than Torchwood was. After all, this was the series' first. But having that role as a head producer and head writer, and writing these sort of fundamental stories will benefit Chris Chibnall, because he isn't a stranger to taking the lead on TV shows, especially ones related to Doctor Who, which is especially a good benefit for what he has to come. But obviously Russell T Davies was busy writing Doctor Who, and it would have been hard for him to write two series at the same time. So giving the sort of this opportunity to write the finale to Chris Chibnall will help him in the future, and I hope that he writes episodes as sort of good and important as this. Now, I say it's Chibnall's weakest, and I personally don't like it myself, but I wanted to say that it does handle action, it handles the climax, it handles the suspense really well, whilst also balancing that out with character development and character relationships and all that jazz in between. It has a perfect balance of the two, and I think that is sandwiched perfectly in there. But I feel like it would have benefited from being a two-parter, because I feel like it was honestly too convoluted. It had the sort of, dare I say it, Power of Three ending where it was all very rushed. The main threat of Agador or Agadon, one of them's Curse of Peladon, the other one's this. You can make up your mind which one. He literally came in 1 minute and he was defeated literally 3 minutes later. It was very sort of, it was very quick, it was very rushed. you sort of got an idea of the threat, and people did die in the space of those 3 minutes, but having the threat drawn out longer would have benefited this incredibly, and we spent too much time focusing on, I can't remember his name, Bilius or something, Billis. There was too much concentration on him, and seeing as he doesn't really appear again, it's sort of, unnecessary. We should have had more of Agadon stomping around Cardiff and causing death and threats and showing his full power, and then have him defeated at, like, I don't know, maybe 10-15 minutes later at a minimum. But this does show that Chris Chibnall is not scared of large-scale Earth invasions like we had in the Russell T Davies era. We've had the giant threats where people just don't forget what's happened. It's like it's no mystery that we can just have these things and have the impact that has on the human race and human culture in present-day human times. But another thing about The End of Days, it captures the emotional farewell of a finale. This could have been the end of Torchwood as we know it. You can't guarantee another series for, especially like small-scale spin-offs like this. Look what happened to Class. But it does, and if we have that sort of emotional element in Doctor Who as a series finales, and we have everybody wanting more and wanting the characters back, then that will be great. That's something that we need. We just don't want to leave it, off we go again, bye. We want a sort of emotional conclusion to it, because it is the end of a series as it goes, and that should be something big. That should be something not to celebrate, and it should be something mournful. It's the end of something, it's the end, and that's a bit sad, because it could be no more, even though Doctor Who signed on for a 5-year contract. But let's not just not worry about that, because we want it back. We want that feeling of, we want this show to come back. We want to see these characters again. Give us that, and it'll be great. So moving on to the next series of Torchwood, in Series 2, Chris Chibnall then wrote the very next episode as it goes, with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Now, of course, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is known for the introduction of Captain John Hart, a fellow time agent and absolute lovely character. It's the sort of introduction of a seductive, fun and flirty character, but that's not his only characteristic. That's not his only defining characteristic. He's also got this dangerous side with him, and that's what sort of is the element of fun for him. It could be said that Captain John Hart is like River Song in certain aspects, with the only major difference being their gender. But I think what Captain John Hart has above River Song is that it's not purely a positive relationship between him and the protagonist. In John's case is Captain Jack, in River's case is the Doctor, and I think having that rivalry makes it more fun and less boring, to be fair, because if you just have the two flirting back and forth to each other, it can get a bit sickening. But when you have the protagonist sort of repel those sort of actions and those sort of, what's it called, hang on, cut while I think of the name, advances, why'd that take me so long to think of, that absolutely makes it more fun, and it sort of makes it more repulsive, because let's be honest, a strong 95% of us, if someone came up to us and acted like that, we wouldn't go along with it and we wouldn't like it. So if we've got that sort of relationship between two characters where one is repulsed by the advances of a flirty and like too sort of liberally sexual character, which is fine if you are, but just, not on kids' TV, thanks. Before I get myself in a barrel of worms, yes, it's good. Great sexual fun characters who are also villains are good, and I hope someone like Captain John Hart comes in. I hope John Hart does come back in a sort of more tame way to Doctor Who, because he technically is a character of Chris Chibnall's. He coined the script that had his introduction, so I think technically that means he's in his sort of control. So if someone like him, if not him, comes back, I will be a very happy boy indeed. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang also uses threats and tension brilliantly, because it's not just the sort of build up to the problem happening and it's like, oh no, this isn't going to happen. It uses that, oh no, it has happened, Gwen is now paralysed, oh no. But I think if there is a bit where a companion's tied up and being tortured and the Doctor has no idea where they are, that'd be great. Or, not exactly that situation, but if like a companion is just stranded and you are made to feel like there is no hope and there is no way to get out of it, that's a job well done, to be fair, because you want to know how this is going to happen. You don't want to predict it. You want to be worried and threatened. That's the whole point of tension and stakes. You want to keep the audience on their seat. You don't just want to keep them sitting there like, oh, well, yeah, that's going to happen, innit? She's going to fly in and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang also sets up the foundation for a story arc with John Hart's last words about "I know where Grey is" or "I found Grey," something along those lines, and that sets up a story arc without being too self-imposing on the plot, without being too poignant to the story. And that's something we need, because obviously Doctor Who has been sort of jam-packed with story arcs and narrative threads and everything like that, and you haven't really got much breathing air for what Doctor Who is supposed to be, which is a sort of serial of individual stories, self-contained, really. And if you have that imposed too much, that sort of loses that. But this has a sort of narrative arc just gently introduced. You pick up on it, you think, wow, I wonder what that is, we'll probably find out later, I'm looking forward to theorising on that, instead of just having it like fisted inside of you. And also, a nice little point, this episode, I think, as far as I'm aware, is the first one to introduce the fact that Ianto is bisexual, because he asks Captain Jack out on a date, and it's not too in your face about it, because I think one of the main criticisms that Bill had is that every episode just saying, oh, I'm not into men, oh, I'm gay, by the way, yeah, I'm gay, I'm not into men, I'm a lesbian, I'm gay, which is fine, you know, big up representation, but if there's a way to sort of do it, not subtly, because you want the representation to be obvious and notable, and you want the people to be represented, but if you just have it like it's a normal conversation, not impose your sexuality onto other people, like every other episode, because it can get a bit tiring. I think there's a video for another day about how in your face you have to be with LGBT representations while still keeping it sort of noticeable, but you don't want it like low enough that it just doesn't matter, because that has happened in a couple of episodes and it's sort of been swept under the carpet that is their sexual orientation. But just having this, you are aware of it, there's a relatively big thing made about it, and it is something that reflects on Jack and Ianto's relationship in future episodes, but having that introduced and not having it not being too obvious is a good thing. I think it's some decent representation there, like, oh, okay, he's bi, that's a thing, cool. But yeah, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, all in all, a decent ep, I like it, decent villain, which I'd like to see more of. But what about the next episode that Chris has up his sleeve? Well, let's have us a find out in... Adrift, I like Adrift. Now, I find Adrift similar in certain aspects to Countrycide with a weird C, because it doesn't have an alien threat as such. The villain is very much human, but not even the villain's human. It's just the villain is the situation, and I just adore an episode in Doctor Who or Torchwood or anything sci-fi like that where the antagonist isn't extraterrestrial or supernatural or anything like that, even though it's in a certain case it is in Adrift, because the villain in some respects is the time rift, but it's not a villain who wants to be a villain, it's not a villain who knows it's a villain, it's just a villain which is a natural occurrence. And I think if an episode can pull that off, it's a really good episode, because there's not an antagonising force like there is in every other episode. It makes it unique and it makes it special, and I just really want to see something like that just once in the new series of Doctor Who, because that would be brilliant. If it can be pulled off good, then it'll be brilliant, like it is in Adrift. Adrift shows that Chris Chibnall can perfectly handle emotional stories, it can perfectly handle character sadness. A lot of his episodes so far in Torchwood at least have handled sort of emotions, particularly negative emotions, and what effects they have on characters, but this showcases how he writes that brilliantly. He's able to create characters and put them in situations which makes the audience care for them. These characters, these supporting roles, have only appeared in this one episode, but still we care about them, we want them to succeed, we want them to find out what happened to this woman's son, because we care about her emotionally, we are invested in her story, pardon me. And talking to the supporting cast, it is the perfect way. I know this isn't technically Chibnall's input, Miss More casting, but still, it's a good way to show how to use a supporting cast. Because Ruth Jones, back then where this was like broadcast, she was big. I mean, she sort of still relatively is, but back then it was all Gavin and Stacey and stuff like that. And it was a relatively renowned actress to have in this little sci-fi show. And I like what they've done with her, because it didn't put her in a comedic role like most people would know her for. It's a very emotional and sort of traumatising role, if you think about it. It's very serious in some respects. And I, big up to them for doing that. It wasn't just a comic relief that they put her in. They showcased her use as an actress and showed that, this is a TV drama where people act and it's for actresses. I know you can have more leeway with that in Doctor Who because it's a family show and you need that comedy, but I think it's really good that they didn't cast her in a sort of typecast comedic role, because that is nice. It gets to we're allowed to see her range, and if that happened more with guest stars and didn't just sweep them in a 5-minute comedic role like Bill Bailey or Mitchell and Webb or any of the other countless wasted roles that we've had in Doctor Who over the years, I think if we just put them to use, that'd be brilliant, would it not? But yeah, it also focuses on the character development of Gwen, and it sort of returns her from this hard and cold and sort of almost emotionless character that Torchwood has crafted her into, and it has made her a more soft thing that, like she was in the beginning of Series 1, it sort of reverted and not reminded her of her roots. I think that's good, because that is still character development and progression, because even if you go back on yourself from one point, that's still progress. You're still developing a character, because even negative effects that a story has on a character, if it changes them, that's development. We are moving somewhere. The character's not just staying the same, and if a character sees the error of that progress later on in their arc and they move back to how they were originally, that's still good. That is how humans work, and if you incorporate that into a script, then fucking good on you. Well done. That's some tasty stuff. But yeah, away from Adrift, which I still love, I'm moving on to the last 2 episodes that Chris Chibnall ever done, the 2-parter of the Series 2 of Torchwood, Fragments and Exit Wounds.
Not like this!
Now, I've grouped these 2 together because they are continuous, but separate. They are 2 very different episodes. Even though they follow the same story, in a sense, they have completely different tones and a completely different sort of story. We follow different things during them, which I think is good, because there's some more originality and there's more diversity in your episodes, and you're not just expecting the same thing. Things don't become predictable. It's a good viewing experience if you're watching one after the other, or even if you're broadcasting it one week and the other week. You've got some diversity in the tone and the storytelling, which, that's fine. But I think together as a story, it's a bit, especially Fragments, because all it is chronologically, if we're actually thinking about in terms of the current present day story, that's only about 5 minutes. A building explodes and they go around trying to get each other out. There's no real imposing threat at this point, even though it's introduced at the end as Captain John Hart returns. It's not really there, and the main chunk of the episode is based on the flashbacks and introducing how the characters were introduced to Torchwood. And I think it's a decent idea. It's original sort of idea for a filler episode, but it doesn't really feel like the beginning of a finale, and I feel a lot of it could have been cut, especially the stuff with Owen and that stuff, because I think it's a decent idea to get the origin story for Owen and Tosh, because it's their last chance, because spoilers alert, they get killed off next episode, so it's really your only chance to introduce their origins and that now. And I think Owen and Tosh's origins were the strongest part of the episode, to be fair, because they've got some unique stuff. But I think, if you could, they'd be better as their own episode somewhere else in the story, and not as a flashback in the first part of the finale. If I have to give it Fragments credibility, then it would be that it doesn't take it doesn't heighten your expectations, so when it does come for the grand finale of the series, then you're hit it's like, wow, where'd this come from? It's great. But overall, I just feel it's sort of unnecessary. It doesn't really add anything apart from us to invest in the characters more than we already have, but the characters that we're focusing on, we've already spent 2 series with, so if we're not invested by now to get prepared for their death, so if we're not worried about the situations they're in now, then they haven't done a good job of building up their characters over the 2 series we've been watching them, which they have. So showing these flashbacks over the course of one whole episode is a bit unnecessary. I doubt we're going to get anything like that in Doctor Who, even though I suppose it would be nice for a sort of flashback episode, or a memory type thing, but I just think it was a bit out of place, especially in the first part of the finale. Moving on to Exit Wounds, again, Chris Chibnall shows showrunner-like abilities in his writing. He's given the responsibility of killing off Tosh and Owen. He's given the responsibility of the grand sort of adventure and the reveal of Grey, I do think that the secret brother reveal is a bit cliche, like it's definitely been done in other mediums before, but it still worked. I just hope that Chris Chibnall comes up with more original ideas for Doctor Who. Maybe the whole secret brother, maybe it was just an idea of Russell T Davies, as he is the creator of Torchwood and executive producer. Maybe that's on him, who knows, but Chris Chibnall still executed brilliantly in the writing and the storytelling. Both of the deaths of Tosh and Owen, they are effective. I did feel something with both of their deaths, because they were characters I've come to love and I cared when they died. That's a fundamental. They were likeable, so when they died for good, I cared about them. However, I do feel like they were too close to each other. Maybe if one was in the first part of the finale in Fragments, if Owen got sliced by the window pane or something, then maybe it was because it just came at you like boom boom, it was one after the other, and you're just thinking, am I still sad over Owen's death to care that much about Tosh? Or I didn't really see the angle that Chris was going there, and I do think it was a bit rushed, which is something that I am worried about, and I hope he does improve on, because a lot of his finales have had a sort of rushed endings. I'm talking about the Agador one, and this. I think he needs more time to explore and sort of stretch out, not in terms of time, but in terms of pacing. Things just need to happen at a steady pace instead of just a load of build-up and then death, end, if you know what I'm saying. I did enjoy the sort of, if you want to call it a redemption arc, of John Hart. I do think that redemption arcs is something that we do need, because I adored Missy's one. I think we all know that's no secret, but if we need more of them, then sign me up, please. And also, as I say, especially with something like Torchwood, not really applicable to Doctor Who, but having it sort of close off, it felt like the ending of a chapter. It was the end of one age, and it feels like whatever was coming next would be the birth of another. And I feel like that was really tied up really nicely. Both felt like an end to something, and we want to see more of them and what new adventures they get on. Overall, I really enjoy Chris Chibnall's stories for Torchwood. I do think they are stronger than his Doctor Who episodes, whether that was because he had more creative freedom or he had more episodes to actually write in succession, who knows, but I do think it showcases his ability as a showrunner perfectly, and I can't wait if he incorporates a lot of what he wrote here into his new Doctor Who work. That'd be brilliant. I do think, as a closing note, what we all need to remember is that writers can develop and adjust to the themes and tones of what they're writing for. Like, Chris Chibnall won't write, I suppose, the quality of Day One in the new Doctor Who, because that's not what Doctor Who is about, that's not what it's for. The raw footage of this is good, 45 minutes. Let's see if I can cut this down. If I don't, then congratulations if you got this far. See you next time. I promise I'll never make anything this long again.